Hello, and today I'm so delighted to introduce Lana Nelson. Welcome to you, Lana.
Thank you very much. So honored to be here with Miss Deb.
We've got a beautiful set of conversation to be had today, because when we connect with people who are like-minded, there's always more to explore. So let's begin, Lana, and tell us more about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, I am a food intuitive, if you will, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. In my journey, I wrote a book on how to intuit what food is good for you, right here, right now, today, etc. And I teach people this. I work with what's called energy medicine, and I work with people all over the planet. I work with several people in your area, and work with food, nutrition, health, wellness, just balancing the body physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
Beautiful. That's fantastic. And so how would you describe your own well-being journey?
Hard. Up until, difficult, as you know. I was very healthy as a child. I rode horses. I was just zooming all over the place. And about my mid-30s, I owned a dental lab. I was on my way one day to deliver a set of dentures to someone, and those dentures never made it. There was an accident up ahead of me, and I started to slow down as a semi-truck hit the back of my car, which my head took the brunt of that injury. And so for about 10 years, I suffered with excruciating headaches, pain from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. And that was the beginning of my real wellness journey and seeking out how to be free from that.
Wow. And thankfully, it was your neck, and you've managed to go through that healing journey, and, you're here sharing the other parts of your story with us. So that's beautiful to hear. And so if we look at this, so you mentioned chronic pain there. Mm-hmm. I'm just seeing this around me so much, and I'm sure you are, where there's this dramatic increase in mystery illness and people suffering from chronic pain, sometimes like yours, induced by a motor vehicle accident, but sometimes just from unknown causes. So why do you believe this is the case?
Well, there are several different reasons. Stress is, I think, one of the huge problems. Stress will break you down anywhere from your physical being, your mental, emotional being, and stressors of anything, really. We live in a world today that, if you think about when is the last time you had 24 hours of no stress, most people can't even imagine that. So stress being huge with our jobs, our family, so much going on there. But stress as a problem. We also live in a really toxic world, okay? And one of my messages is how to know what foods to eat for you. And in this, we don't know exactly where some of our foods even come from. And our food has become so denatured that a lot of what we call food today is not even food. But also other stressors. There are so many toxins and pathogens are bothering people. They're finding that, you can have a pathogen in your body for a lifetime. So pathogens, toxins, the wrong kind of foods, emotions can be very strong. Those are some of the key stressors, I do believe.
Yeah, I concur with that. There's definitely, the world is not the same place as where, our parents, our grandparents grew up, and, there's something to be said about all, modernization, except we haven't adapted in the physiological sense, because our bodies were pre-designed and they were perfectly designed. So it's quite interesting, the discrepancy, I guess, between living in a modern world and the bodies that we were born with. And you worked with your husband, Dr. Bruce Nelson. He's a holistic chiropractic physician. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Okay. Well, that journey was, I told you that I was in that car accident. I surfed I searched for 10 years trying to find out how to get out of pain. And so I went through the full medical gamut. And the third neurologist that I saw said, I think you should see a chiropractor with this horrendous pain in your head. So I did, and I thought, I remember, oh, my mother had gone to a chiropractor when I was a child. So I found a chiropractor who helped me, and sometimes it made it a lot better. It actually made it a lot better most of the time, but something was not quite there. I searched through nutrition, through herbs. I started juicing, which in that day and age, it was really weird. Today, everybody's juicing and drinking green juice. No. It was back then, people thought it was very, very strange. So I started with weird food methods and so forth. And I said to a friend of mine one day, I was seeing a chiropractor a lot. And I said to my friend one day, you know, I should marry a chiropractor. I'm seeing one 3 times a week. And we giggle to each other. So as you speak, so shall it be. You know, if your intentions go out, I believe everywhere. I was set up with a man on a blind date. And he actually this is funny because we had both become single about the same time. And he was a chiropractor. And he had heard of a woman who lived in my area who I owned a dental lab at that time, who owned a dental lab, and I had 6 children, okay? So we're sitting in the back seat of a car going to, you know, on a double date with some friends, mutual friends whom we didn't know even knew each other. So as we were sitting in the back seat, I said, well, what do you do? And he said, oh, I'm a doctor. What kind? A chiropractor. I said, oh, that's nice. And what do you do? And I told him I owned a dental lab and so forth. And he started laughing and laughing. And I said, what is so funny? And he mentioned a mutual friend of ours, literally that had been trying to get us together for 5 years. The right time, the right place. And he also specialized in fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, which in those days was just not heard of, okay? It was the beginning of those mystery illnesses that you speak of. So I had gone to 10 years of different kinds of doctors and so forth, seeking out what the problem was with my mystery illness. He said, you know, this fibromyalgia, I work with it. So literally using the methods that he used to find out what my nutrition levels were in my body. I had some bones out of place still, but I was taking so much nutrition, he pinpointed the exact nutrition I needed. For instance, a B12, I was taking hundreds of dollars of nutrition every month, but I was taking the wrong kind. So with this method, he pinpointed what I needed. So long story short, we married not quite a year later, and he had 6 children. I had 6 children. So we combined 2 fabulous families, and this year was our 25th anniversary. So, and pain-free for those years as well.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Just on the love stakes, given it's, you know, February and we're in the month of allegedly love. But I think what's so exciting to hear about that is you had no real understanding of energy medicine until you started to actually work with him and date him. So that
I was seeking to find, and it was, you know, just one thing after another, and did find that.
Ah, that's beautiful. And so I guess this is where the seeds of your book has come from, and I'd love you to tell us about your book. So the book is called The Food Codes: Intuitive Eating for Everybody, and it's available on Amazon, both on paperback and in Kindle form. And I'd love to know, Lana, why did you write it, and who is this book for?
This book is for everyone who eats and wants to know exactly what they should and should not eat. Literally, some people don't care. This is written for people who do care, and people who are confused about all the conflicting advice out there, because over the years, you know, people will say, this food is good for you, that, and some expert says, this is good for you, that's good for you. Another expert comes out with going, oh, no, 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 that will cause, cancer, etc. So each person is individual. You can also use this with animals, and I know people love their animals these days. But my book is about, first of all, it's about relationships and your first relationship, which is actually with food. If you think about a baby in the womb, that baby will take the nutrition and food from the mother in order to survive. And then as that baby is put to breast to suckle, one of the first things it tastes is its sweet mother's milk. So it's actually a book of how I teach you how to determine a method called muscle testing or energy testing that I learned through my husband, Dr. Bruce Nelson, on how to find out what imbalances were in your body. But so I think one of your questions, I'm getting off here, is how I started this. So after we were married, I moved from my city to his city and I kept my dental lab for about 6 years, but I started working in his office as well. And he worked with people who were very, very ill, basically with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and other mystery illnesses. People that had been diagnosed with different, maybe emotional problems, and they're saying, oh, it's all in your head. That's a big one. One of our patients actually had been locked up in the psych ward for 3 days, unable to get herself out from there. She had one of those mystery illnesses. She had fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. And so working with my husband and actually learning some of the methods that he was using, I said, there's one missing piece to this puzzle, because he addressed the body as a whole system, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but there was one little thing missing, big thing actually. I said, our patients need to have the right foods, because he tested nutrition for them and not testing food. So I started playing around with myself and making what I called food plan. So I tested what foods were my best foods, what foods I needed to stay away from. Then I started to do this with patients. And each patient had similarities, and each patient had many differences as well with what foods they needed to do well. And then those foods changed over a little period of time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks or months. So does that answer your questions, Gail?
Yes, that's perfect, because what I recognize is, obviously, if people understand how the book is different, that it's not a book about dieting. Yes, it might support you to make choices about food, but it's uniquely you. It's something about you rather than just, a protocol.
Yes, it's actually a book of how not to ever diet again, because people are, there's a diet, there are a lot of fibromyalgia diets out there as an example, or weight loss diets, and one will tell you do this, the other says don't do that. And some people will have a great result, some people will not. And sometimes you'll have a great result, try it again, and you don't get that result. So your body is ever interfacing with your environment, those stressors we talked about earlier. So my book actually teaches you how to find what foods to eat and enjoy right now, a year from now. And also, I teach you how to determine how to cook with those foods as well, because how to make a recipe and so forth. So a lot more than just finding those foods. I teach you how to use them for you and how to do it with your family as well.
And we know that food is medicine, so that's beautiful. It's a wonderful way to support people. And in your book, you talk about the relationship we have with food and making food your friend. So could you talk more about that?
You bet. That's another thing. With a diet, think about how you feel about a diet. You go into it, I'm going to bust this out, I'm going to do this right now. for this amount of time, and then I'm going to gobble up anything I want. So it's about restriction. It's about keeping yourself from food. Think about this. If you have a good friend, what do? You love to settle in, you love to talk. You're not sitting there in fear and, deprivation and so forth. So I mentioned earlier that baby who suckles at the mother's breast, babies have a fabulous relationship with food. In the beginning, if you try to feed them too much, you're not going to get another spoonful into their mouth. And if you manage to pry it, zoomy, let's eat, get it in there, they'll spit it back at you. They know when they're hungry. They know when they're full. And we, as grown-ups, have lost those urges. We've lost the intuition, that intuitive eating that a baby knows. So getting back to our relationship with intuitive eating, with knowing when we're hungry, with knowing when we're full, and then enjoying our relationship with that. Some people, if you mention chocolate cake to them, they did a study of, I think it was the French in Europe and an American, let's say. And what do you think of chocolate cake? The Western civilization or culture in America said, fat, obesity, deprivation, or fear. And those aren't the exact words, but it was in that line. And the French said, so getting back into that joy, that bliss, that peace. So we can actually have a piece of chocolate cake and say, oh, this is the most delightful thing on the planet for me right now, as we would with a good friend. And with friends also, we choose friends who are like-minded and friends who are wholesome, whole and good. If that's the ideal. So does that make sense to you, Bev?
Yes, that does. I love that whole conversation there around, because we have, I think, for anyone who has had a weight gain over time, it may have been post a pregnancy, it might have been after a breakup, it may have been as a result of medication. They're not, instead of going back, and I've witnessed my daughter do this. She did this throughout her lifetime of enjoying and eating for pleasure. And when she felt she'd overindulged, she would just pull back a little bit naturally. She would never go and when you mentioned chocolate cake, I thought you were going to talk about that point system. There's a diet with point system, and a piece of you could eat chocolate cake all day and be within your points, and yet you would get no nutrition. So I thought that's where you were going to take that part of the conversation. But that's great, that whole concept of being in relationship with food and in right relationship, for you. What is it that you need to eat, taking pleasure from that food? And you mentioned intuitive eating there. So how can a person actually eat that way? How can they be intuitive about how they eat?
Okay, there are a couple of different ways. We have our inner knower as our inner subconscious mind, okay? A lot of people are very, very intuitive with that. A baby is, like with food. They know what they want. They know when they've had enough. But we, as we get a little older, we pull back out of that state. And so, a lot of people that are intuitive and can meditate, they can see, they can feel, they can know. They might know exactly what foods are good for them. But then someone else that says, no, I don't do any of that. I don't really know. I'm listening to the expert's advice. And so what my husband taught me, and what a lot of people are using these days, it's come from being one of those woo-woo things like green juice and drinking green juice, or like yoga used to be. 20 years ago, yoga was one of those, what they call strange or weird things. Now yoga is fully embraced and loved and even used in hospitals and so forth. So the method that I've learned to use that really has come forefront, and it's coming more forefront now, is called muscle testing. Also, some people call it kinesiology. So in my book, I teach you exactly how to use muscle testing for intuitive eating to tune in with your subconscious. So using, let's say, a muscle of a hand, okay, and a muscle of a finger. And we ask yes or no questions. You can say, so, and you get lie detector test, okay? A lie detector test it contacts your intuitive mind through your skin. When you put on the lie detector test, it can test nuances in your skin, all right? So whether you're lying or telling the truth, and the subconscious mind cannot tell a lie. It can only tell the truth. So even on a lie detector test, you'll get a yes or a no answer. So asking yes or no answers, for instance, I have an apple in my hand, and using muscle testing, I'm going to use my pointer finger as a strong, to test and ask a yes or no question. So this is a yes, and my finger does not drop. Putting pressure on my finger, I get a strong yes. A no answer, a no is a drop in that. You can use many different, and in my book I show you many different ways. Some people would sway forward for a yes, backward for a no. So there are many different ways. But for instance, I have an apple in my hand, and I'm asking my subconscious, is this apple good for me? Yes. Is this apple a bad food for me? No. So does that make sense, Bev?
Yes.
How to
Yes.
access inner intuition of
Yes,
your
that's
own.
great. And I'm glad that you mentioned different ways of doing it so that people can actually find that way that's going to work for them. And I know that with my clients also use the body as a pendulum, because I find
pendulums work.
that it works really well in supporting them to make healthy choices for themselves. And like you mentioned, I think just knowing that you have the choice. We all have choice, but knowing that you have the choice and actually listening to that inner wisdom, I think it's so empowering and so powerful.
Yes. Also, think about this. We're going back to that chocolate cake again, okay? Now, you can make that chocolate cake good or really bad for you, okay? Think about people who say, oh, I'm going to eat this, but I know it's really bad for me. You better believe it is really bad for you. And in the book also, give me gratitude. Gratitude can change frequency. Blessing or giving gratitude to your food, eating it in pure joy and gratitude, as you are the lady for joy and fun, okay, in having a good time. Eating is one of the biggest pleasures of life. So why not, if you really want that piece of chocolate cake, go ahead and eat it and say, this is the most divine thing on the planet for me right now. And it's a possibility it really could be, okay? I'm not saying to eat that all day for all your points or whatever you do, but with intention, eat with intention.
And I found that, for example, those people who are living with food intolerances, so they know intuitively a lot of the time, because they're so in tune with, the things that are causing them problem while they are healing their gut or whatever that is that needs to be healed. But what I have a lot of people say to me, and I'd be curious to know your answer on this one, is they feel different when they're out with their friends. And for me, I then ask them to shift the focus and make it not about the food they're eating, but about the company and the friendship. So I'm just interested, do you cover things like food intolerances in your book?
You can find a food intolerance simply means oftentimes it has to do with an underlying cause. Maybe, for instance, you had a reaction to a strawberry, and about that same time, you had an extreme fear. Something happened. Maybe you cut your finger, and you sliced it on, on your spade or a rock or something as you were eating that strawberry. Sometimes emotions can be involved with food intolerances and so forth, and it can be anything physical, literally, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually involved with any of that. So I give you some ideas in my book of how to look for this, but you can actually, in your food testing, sometimes a food will test as a good food for you, and you know that's an allergy or an intolerance. If that happens, look into what the nutrition of that food is and why your body might need that for a certain type of nutrition. So knowing that in advance, you could look into, why do I need this type of food? I've had a reaction from it in the past. Oh, it's actually that extra calcium that's in that food that is what I'm really looking for. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes, that does. So it's sort of substitution then, by understanding, like you say, the nutritional components of the food that's tested as good. If you have, like I think for most of us who have anything to do with food intolerances, I know that I would never, as a baby, I wasn't intolerant to all of these foods. So there's things that have changed in myself, but there's also things that have changed in the environment that have made me sensitive to these particular things. So that's helpful that you actually cover that and how to navigate that. So that's really great. So Lana, what would you say if you've created this beautiful book, it's your gift out into the world, what legacy would you like to leave with your book, The Food Codes?
I would like to totally change the diet mentality around that deprivation and the fear that we feel toward eating food, and to leave a legacy of people to really realize what they are doing. People will medicate themselves with food by overeating, or to forget their problems or distract themselves in some ways. But really, I would like a legacy to realize that our first relationship is with food, to regain that, and I teach you how to do that in my book.
That's beautiful. And so what are your tips then, Lana, for living fabulously?
Living fabulously, one of my tips is first, is to find out when you're hungry and when you're not. I teach you how to do that in my book as well, because we lose that. We're used to eating at 3 bells a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And then we're used to doing some snacking in between time. Getting back with that relationship with food, know when you're hungry. I teach you through that process of muscle testing. So am I really hungry right now? Or am I hungry on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? No, I'm not so hungry right now. Wait a little bit for that. And so, because when you're hungry, when you actually enjoy your relationship more with food. Let's say you and your girlfriend are together for, 2 weeks straight and you're never apart. You might get a little tired of each other. You might be wanting that, a little bit of a break. So knowing when you're hungry, and then as you are eating, knowing when you're full, and you can use muscle testing as well to know just at that point right before you start to get full, because if the feeling of when you're over full, it's miserable. So you will learn how to know. I would love to teach people how to know when they're full, to stop eating, and totally feel satisfied with that. Learning how to do that, it's marvelous. It truly is. It makes food one of your best friends. Does that make sense?
Yes, beautiful. So 2 great tips right there. Wonderful. Did you have any more you wanted to share, or was that?
Well, in cooking, I would love to give you another tip too. You know how our grandmothers cooked? They didn't have a recipe, okay? A lot of people say, okay, well, I can do this for myself, but I have a partner, I have a husband, I have children, I have a wife. What do I do? This is marvelous because I give you so many examples of how to cook with templates, so to speak. let's look at a soup, for instance. You want to make soup, and you know these vegetables are your best food, and this protein is your best food. And you can also test for your family as well. My family is huge, as I've told you, 12 and 12, and they've married and had children and so forth. But when we get together, I actually keep in mind feeding everyone. And so I will put different foods together. So let's say a salad bar, for instance, a couple of different kinds of greens, and then different types of vegetables or fruits or proteins. And so I teach you really how to make your own recipe using parts of. So you get 3 parts of, let's say, 3 parts of vegetables, 2 parts of a protein, and as a couple examples for a recipe. And then I have examples of how different people's food plans and how they have used them, how they've made their own recipes. So getting you back to basics. I also teach you that, and this is really a cool thing, I think, is how to shop with your test to purchase the foods in a store. And I do suggest shopping locally and buying locally and so forth for your best health and so on. So I give you lots of tips. I think that's kind of, and I also give you energy tips on how to digest them and so forth. How about that?
That sounds amazing. So everybody, you know that this book is available on Amazon. I'm sure you're wanting to get hold of it. So it's easy to find on Amazon.com. You just search for the food codes, and I will put this in the show notes for you though as well. And you can find Lana Nelson at her website. It's www.thefoodcodes.com. You'll also find her on Facebook. It's The Food Codes and a number 1. And then she's got a beautiful YouTube channel also called The Food Codes. So you'll be able to go and stalk Lana lovingly and learn from her. So Lana, thank you so much for being with me today and sharing this wisdom, because what I love too is that each of us have either a love or a hate relationship with food. There doesn't seem to be anybody that I've met who's kind of in between. So yes. What I found really inspiring here is that for the person who doesn't like food, you've given them a solution. Find what works for you. You know, find the person who absolutely loves food and actually perhaps overeats, find how much you need to eat, when you need to eat it, those type of things. So you sort of covered all those bases around our relationship with food and creating that real insight and inner knowing around what and when and how. I love that. You've got the aspects of that covered there. I think one thing that really stood out for me was when you were talking about intuitive eating, you were also talking about sort of that holistic thing. If you step back and you look at this, you have had a relationship with food and you knew what to do right from the beginning. You knew what to do. So it's actually taking us full circle into that body wisdom. And that's, I think, for me, what really was a standout. So thank you so much for being with me today. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show.
And thank you, Bev, for living fabulously and helping others do the same thing. Thank you.